right, I want to get the big elephant out of the room, particularly with Michaela and Sarah. I work with so many people, and their biggest obstacle is their fear of pitching you all. So I would love it if you all could talk about why they shouldn't be afraid. And then we're going to get into what's really important is pitching you good stories. But Sarah, why don't you talk about, let's get the fear out of the room, let people understand you are approachable, you're people just like us, and you're doing your job, and we can just help you make your job easier.
Right, exactly. So I'm sorry if that is how you all feel, but we want to talk to you. Our goal and really our job is to tell our readers and our audiences, which are all a little bit different, and we can get into that, but we want them to know what's going on and why they should care and why it's relevant to them. So if you're doing something that we should be telling them about, it's in our interest to talk to you. We're not out to get you. Of course, we will always have to cover good and bad news, but we're not trying to do anything sneaky as much as just ask you what you're working on and why our readers should know about it.
Great. Michaela, you have any follow-up to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would also just start off by saying, like, first of all, I'm the least intimidating person you will ever meet. Like, you could probably just send me like a cat picture and I would respond. But also just know that, we're journalists and we're very knowledgeable of the community, but we don't know everything. We have our limits. So if you're not there telling us what we should be covering, I don't own a startup. I don't know everything. So, I love when people come to me and say, hey, I would love it if you would cover this. Because that's how we find out what to do.
I love that. And I love what you said, send me a cat picture, because one of the things that I teach people is get to know your journalists, not just on a, it's what's in it for me kind of basis, but build a relationship with them. It's so important. So if you have a cat, guess what? Michaela likes cats. You could start talking about that. So I have kind of a formula that I use with my clients. I call it the Get PR Famous formula. You want to be newsworthy. You want to create a great hook, which is something to get the journalist to actually read that email. And then, of course, you want to find the right journalist. So I want to start off, obviously, we have our right journalist here because we're in the room for startups. But I want to talk about what makes a story newsworthy. And I'm going to have, all three of you might have different approaches to that. But Michaela, let's start with you. What do you find makes a story newsworthy?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, two of the biggest things for us are, is it a company that's based in the DC area, and does it relate to tech and entrepreneurship news? And if you checked both of those boxes, it's better than like half the press releases in my inbox. But other than that, it's a lot of, have we covered you before? Are you something new to us? Is it a topic that everybody's talking about right now? I mean, right now, everybody's talking about 4-day work weeks and kind of flexible work and stuff like that, if it's related to that in any way. And something else I just use as a great general rule of thumb is, we want to be a resource to the community. So just thinking about who you are as someone existing in this startup ecosystem, and as a DC founder, is this something you would want to read or might have an impact on the community if it weren't related to your company? So yeah, if you can check all those boxes, I think you'd be in pretty good shape.
I love that. I have my clients do that test. Would you want to read the story you're pitching? So I think that's a really important thing you could just think about before you send that in. Would you actually want to read it? How about Sarah? What do you find is newsworthy for you?
Yeah, so as Christina mentioned, there's got to be a timely news hook, a reason that we would write about this now as opposed to a month from now. Like, why am I spending my time on this, and why should our readers know about it now? So there's got to be that element. And then, as Michaela said too, our coverage area is the DC metro region. So it's Montgomery County and Prince George's County in Maryland, Northern Virginia, and the district. So if you're outside of that, we can't pursue it. But after that, it really comes down to just people and the stories, as they said, that you would want to read. And yes, like as a business journal, we have to care about the dollar signs. We'll ask you questions about your business model. But there's also the story of how you got here and where you're going. And I think that is what I look for is, what's most compelling to our readers is the story behind the business, the people driving that business.
Great. Thank you. And Amber, you're actually pitching the media right now. So what are you finding successful in what you're doing for your clients?
Well, I will say most reporters usually will not find a pitch directly from me in their inbox. I'm kind of like behind the scenes a little bit. I'm writing pitches and writing headlines or subject lines as it makes sense. But really, it's really about storytelling. And, you have to identify what is it about your story that is compelling, and understanding that compelling story. To do that, you have to know who you're telling the story to and how you're telling it. So it's about knowing your audience, understanding who you're talking to. Your story might vary a bit depending on who your audience is. Is it investors? Is it, other types of readers? You want to tailor it a little bit to the publication, to the reporter, what they cover. But really, you want to kind of figure out what is it about your story that you can make super compelling and just people really want to read about it and have it resonate with that target audience that you're looking to make inroads with.
Right. And you're absolutely right. Story is everything. And everybody on this call, you have a story that is newsworthy. I teach this all the time. I see the journalists shaking their heads. It's just, how do you make your story valuable to that journalist audience? And that's what's really important. So along those lines, what is it that you look for in a pitch for your publication? Let's give some tips to the audience of what you're looking for, that, like you would talk before, Michaela, about, like, if we check these boxes, how are they most likely to get the yes if they were to pitch you today? And we'll just start with you, Michaela.
Yeah, definitely. So something that's really helpful for me is if, we kind of focus on tech news, but it's not limited to that. Very often we'll do something that's not a quote unquote tech company, but they have something tech related, and we can cover that as well. So if you can just put that tech angle, that local business angle right up front where I can see it, that's a really great, way for me to direct, how this is going to interact with our audience, how they're going to respond to it. So saves me time, and I really appreciate that as well. And I'm not going to not respond to something if you don't do that. But another thing is, we also do a lot of roundups where we do it's called power moves, where we talk about jobs, and we do money moves for raises and stuff if it's not, anything particularly noteworthy. So if you can just kind of get that information right up front to me, it might be a little bit easier for me to do a full story on it versus maybe throwing it into the roundup list as well.
That's great. I always say you have to figure out how your puzzle piece fits in your puzzle. So that's helpful. And every puzzle is a little different. So how about you, Sarah? Tell us about your puzzle.
Yeah, so I would say definitely, and I'm sure we'll touch on this too, but definitely be familiar with the publication you're pitching. So that'll really help you figure out what types of things we're looking for. So for me, if I'm going to pursue something, it's because there is some type of news there. So maybe you're raising money, or you're launching, or you're hiring, or you're growing or moving or expanding. There's got to be something, again, as a business journal, and DC falls under that too. There's got to be a reason that we would be telling this audience about it, because our readers are not the same as the Washington Post. It's not the public, it's the business community. And in addition to that, we really live off of scoops and breaking the news first. So if you're putting out a press release very widely and pitching all of the media in this region, that's great. And you probably will get coverage somewhere, but we don't have enough resources, candidly, to be able to cover every story that's already out there if our audience can get it. So what we love is when you can come to us first and say, hey, I'm going to be raising a round of funding. I'm growing my business. Here's what that would do for me. And I'm coming to you first. I'd love to talk to you about it. And I would love to get on the phone with you to hear your plans beyond that, knowing I can put in the time and effort into this story and bring this to our readers first before they're going to read it anywhere else or in a press release, because then we're serving them and they're coming to us for that information. So that's kind of the big thing that we really focus on.
And that's great. That's really important for everybody watching. If the Washington Business Journal is your ideal news media outlet, give them the exclusive. You just heard it right there from them. They want the exclusive. So it's great to know. And Amber, how about you? What do you have any tricks in your bag that you help your clients get the yes?
I would say yes, I do I bring a lot of kind of tips and tricks. And sometimes it's just, something I'll randomly remember from my reporter days. I used to always say, as a defense reporter, I would say, you can put me in a room with anyone, put me in the room unprepared for an interview with the defense secretary. And I would have my 4 go-to questions in my back pocket, and I'm going to come out with a story. So just kind of understanding the basics of what makes a good story, but also understanding the audience, understanding who you're pitching the reporter and their interests, and how to get their attention. I was notoriously difficult to get attention. My bosses on here and will attest to that. That was kind of like, it was very difficult to get through to me because I was covering federal stuff and I really wanted to talk to federal officials, for the most part, defense officials or recently retired. But somebody emailed me and said, hey, I went to WVU too, go Mountaineers. Can I take you out for coffee and talk to you sometime? And I said yes, and I went and met them for coffee, and we established a great relationship based on that. And it's easy to find out that I love WVU and I'm a diehard fan. Just go to my Twitter account. Like that's what's the background on my Twitter account. So understanding who you're pitching to and also the audience that you're trying to reach. Those are all, fundamentals in successfully landing and getting a yes.
I cannot stress that enough, Amber. You're right. And we've all kind of talked about it a little bit, but finding that connection with the journalist will get you so much closer. You want to build that relationship. I actually went to college with Hoda Kotb of the Today Show and used that angle to be able to interview her. And there's something, as soon as you have a connection with somebody, whether it's cats or, Mountaineers or Hokies or whatever that is, you instantly can start a rapport with the journalist. And back to that, don't be afraid of them. They're really just people like us. So finding that connection, and social media is a great place to do that. Say, don't stalk them too much. But you can easily find out, where you might have a connection. So ladies, I'd love to ask you, how do you like to receive your pitches? Do you want email? Do you want phone call? Do you want people to pitch you on social media? So Sarah, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so for me, it's email. That's 100% my preference. I love talking on the phone, but because of our deadline schedule, and every newsroom, like everyone here has a different deadline schedule, it's just hard to take a pitch and then be able to figure out in that moment whether it's something we could pursue. So if you email me, that is great. And with it, I would just say to include, among the things you would include in any pitch, just the timeline, because if it's something that's, let's say today's Monday, and let's say you want me to write this now because for whatever reason, there's some time sensitive element to it, I should know that, as opposed to looking at it and saying, okay, cool, this could be great for next week when I know I have time. So that's the one thing I would say to make sure, if you're going to email, make that clear.
Great. And Michaela, how about you?
Yeah, definitely. I would agree. Email is easiest. I'll respond to anything. Like if you call me, if you DM me, we have a public Slack channel, if you reach out to me there, like I will respond to it, but email is probably the fastest of anything, especially because you can't really tell, but specifically I live in a basement apartment, so I have like call drop issues occasionally. So that's definitely the best way to reach me. I also really love embargoed stories because I don't think I mentioned it, but I'm really a one-person team here. So it really helps me to be able to plan out ahead of time, like Sarah's mentioned with the timeline. So I can, if you send me something and that news came out that day, I might not have the bandwidth to get to it that day. So it's great if you can get to me as soon as possible.
And then how about follow-up? What do you, and everybody asks me this, well, when am I a nuisance? And when am I just, you guys are busy and I'm following up? So I sent you the email. What do you like the next steps to be if I haven't heard back from you? Michaela, we'll just keep going with you.
Sure. I think email is the best place to do that. As I mentioned, I am a one-person team. So, if I don't get back like immediately, please be patient with me. I will, I promise. I respond to every email. But yeah, I think maybe like just once and maybe a day or two afterwards is pretty much it. If you sent me 2 emails and I haven't responded, it's probably not it. You can also just ask me, if like, is this relevant to your audience? I might say, it's not, but, please keep in touch with me. We'll talk later down the line. So if you just want to be direct, that's also a great way to do it.
Okay. And Sarah, how about you? How do you like the process to go?
Yeah, I agree. I have no problem. If you want to follow up with me, I'm not going to hold it against you. That's good. But I would say if you're going to email me at 10 a.m., don't email me an hour later saying, hey, did you see it? Because the fact is, the same way you're all working hard on your businesses, we are head down a lot of the time during the day. And then when at least for me, I don't know about Michaela, but when I can catch up on email, it's usually later that evening or the following morning. And it doesn't mean I didn't see it. It means I flagged it and I said, okay, this is something I need to take a closer look at when I have a moment to breathe and give them a proper, thoughtful response. So maybe give it a day. Again, if the timing allows for that. Obviously, if there's something more urgent, you can make that very clear, but I would suggest don't come to us right before something needs to happen if there is any sensitive reason that it would. So just as early as you can let us know about something too, that's always really helpful in our planning.
And then Sarah, what about a follow-up phone call? Do you want that or just keep it straight email?
So I'm not going to ignore your email. If you haven't heard from me, it might be because I'm out with a migraine or went to clutter or something. So you're welcome to call me. It's not that I don't want you to call. It's just that it's more likely I'll miss your call because I'm on deadline for something. So yes, feel free to call and just say, hey, is this a good fit or not? Just want to know. And I'll be happy to call you back for sure.
And Amber, what's your process? What do you advise your clients on in terms of pitching?
My clients and my teams, both, I talk to them about, the best ways to get through to catch people's attention, starting with the subject line. So I actually wrote a subject line this morning that said, typos are bringing the world to its knees. And it was about, configuration errors, like the ones that brought down Facebook and WhatsApp for like 6 hours last week or whatever it was. And everybody was like, it turns out this happens all the time. So we're pitching one of our clients who they offer a service that does configuration and change management. We're pitching that client to offer thought leadership and expertise to talk about that. But, then it starts getting in the weeds. You don't want that in your subject line. You don't want to lead with that in your pitch either. So you got to, it's ideal if you can come up with like a punchy subject line. And it takes practice, it takes a little bit of practice and lots of writing and editing, but I bet people will probably open that email just on the premise alone of typos are bringing the world to its knees. Like what? I mean, that's my hope anyway. So.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's part of the formula. You need a hook. I tell people, look at magazine covers because it's an impulse purchase in the grocery store and we buy it based on that hook. Don't bait and switch your journalist though. Make sure that great subject line goes with the story that you're telling. So it's perfect, but don't do a National Enquirer type thing and then it has nothing to do with it. Okay.
Can I just add, Christina?
Yeah, yes.
For me, in an email headline, agreed with everything they just said, but also since there are very certain like specific things, and I think this probably applies technically to some degree too, maybe a little differently, but there are certain business journal things that we look for in a story. So if you can put in the headline, like DC startup raising money, this much, what it's for, like kind of like the nuts and bolts, my eyes will just like gravitate to it because that's what I'm hunting for when I'm trying to figure out what I'm working on in a given day. So if there isn't anything snappy and wonderful, that also will get my attention.
Oh, I love that. Give you exactly what you want. That's perfect. Okay, so there's a lot.
I will say.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So I was going to say, one of my clients was doing they did a funding round and they were doing hiring as a result of the funding round. And we were talking about the strategy. And I said, no, you should do this as two separate, releases and rounds of outreach. One is on the funding round. And then the other one should be about like your hiring spree. And that's what we need to be putting in the subject line. That's what the story needs to be about, because that's what's going to get Washington Business Journal and the Washington area publications is a Washington area based company going on a hiring spree. It just will catch their eye and get coverage. And it worked. Like the 2-part strategy, they didn't buy it at first. They were kind of like, no, we want to do this big bombshell announcement. And I was like, no, this will be better. You'll get a lot more mileage out of it this way. And it ended up working out.
That's great. So I have a question, and there's a lot of back and forth on this, and it could be a preference thing. But the press release has always been around, and it's written a certain way, and all journalists know, the headline, what's the first, what's, where the contact information is. But I have found, especially, in the last 10 years with just the massive growth of social media, and we're able to connect with journalists so easily. Would you rather have the personalized pitch Dear Sarah, I know you cover X, Y, and Z and boom, 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 or would you rather just the blanket press release? And I know you talked about exclusive as well, but kind of in general for stories, would you rather have a personalized specific pitch to you, or would you rather see that old school press release?
Either is fine. I don't necessarily have a preference. I think if the press release has already gone out, send it to me. There's no need to write your own email if this is widely out there already. It's more likely, if that's the case, that it might be a blurb in the DCNO newsletter as opposed to a full story. Again, scoops, exclusives, we have to prioritize those for like our bigger pieces. But yeah, I mean, if the other thing too is if you can come to us before the press release goes out with a personalized pitch and say, here's, this release is going out later this week. Here's are the nuts and bolts of the news. And would you want an interview ahead of that? That's another way to get our attention, because it's a way that we can bring something new to the story beyond just the news of this company raised $1 million. It's more the plans and the vision and how we got here and where it's going.
I love that. Great. Okay, Michaela, how about for you?
Yeah, I'd say the same. I mean, I'm never going to rule something out just because it's a press release or just because it's a personalized email. But yeah, I mean, kind of like Sarah mentioned with her newsletter, we also, like I said earlier, we have those columns that we do a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff gets smushed into there because I'm a one-person team. But if you're going to send me like a personalized email that like I mentioned earlier, points out exactly how this is relevant to our audience, and it's not just, X company raised X amount of dollars. If you're instead sending me an email with, we raised $10 million, we're going to add 300 jobs to the area. That's way more likely to get you like your own personal story than it is to just get you thrown into the list. But don't feel like you need to do it one way or another. And yeah, if it's already out there, I would agree. Don't really waste your time writing it up to me, because I'll still read it either way.
Okay. And Amber, how about you? Do you prefer that your clients do the full-blown press release, or do you show them how to write these personal emails?
If a client wants to do a press release, and a lot of them do want to do it just, for the record and to have on their website, that's fine. I like to advise on sending the press release with a pitch that is tailored to the reporter and what they cover, just to make it relevant to them. Also, pitching it ahead of time, like Sarah was talking about, before the release actually goes out, but reaching out to the reporter and saying, hey, we're about to make this big announcement about this company. We just they just secured a round of funding. They're going to do some hiring. The release is coming out next week. We'll send it to you under embargo, is the industry term for it. And it kind of like makes it a little bit more like intriguing and interesting, because I know as a reporter, someone said they sent me like a report or an announcement under embargo. And I'm like, well, okay, I want to see what this is under embargo. And it just means that you can't report on it until the embargo is lifted or the press release goes out. But it does help with planning coverage. And I think it adds a little bit to like the intrigue and the interest in kind of like checking out whatever it is that they're announcing.
Yeah. I'd add to that too, to Amber's point. When you ask a reporter if they agree to an embargo, we have to agree. Because if I'm already talking to my sources and I know that this company is working on a funding round, for instance, and you send me the press release that says this is embargoed and it has all the information on it, I never agreed to that embargo. So you have to ask, like to Amber's point, you would say, there's a company raising money, do you agree? And if I say, yeah, of course, I'd love to take a look, then you can send it. But that's like a really important rule, because there have been times in our newsroom, and I'm sure in others, where you're about to break a story and you get this email, and it's really upsetting to the person who sent it, because they thought, this is a secret, but it was never a secret.
Excellent.
Don't change the date on it.
Yeah. And I'll share a funny story that I actually heard from Sarah's old boss, who I met at an event. And he said one of the worst pitches he ever got said, dear bracket, insert name here, and then had the pitch. So make sure if you're sending that personalized email, if you're just sending a blanket press release, that's fine. But take the time to make your emails count, and that you really do care about that person, you care about their publication. They're people just like we are. So it's just important if you're going to say, dear Michaela, know something about them, get to know them, make sure that it's appropriate for them. And I always say, just show them the love, show them that you really do care. You're not just, oh, put my story out there. The goal is to build relationships. You really do, because you're growing a company. You'd like to be in these publications consistently, right? That's how more people are going to find out about you. Okay. So moving along, how do you all source your stories? Like, if besides people like us pitching you, Michaela, where do you look for your information?
Yeah, definitely. I will say, again, I am a one-person team, so my inbox keeps me pretty busy. But outside of that, I do look a little bit on social media. It's not the end-all be-all, but yeah, I usually have that kind of up in a tab, and I'll check on it periodically throughout the day just to make sure there's nothing people are really talking about. But also, like, some of it comes from things like this, like in DC Startup Week, I might attend a panel and I see that people are talking about a really interesting topic. And I'm like, well, that's cool. I want to write a story on that. And I'll reach out to those people. So I think it's anywhere and everywhere. And we also do have a public Slack channel as well. And sometimes people will have conversations in there and be talking to each other in there. And that turns into a story. And
you mentioned that. Is it just technically DC on Slack?
Yeah. I can send a link to it later on as well. But yeah, you can, it's on our website.
If this is your ideal publication, jump on that Slack channel. It's a great way to be heard easily. Sarah, how about you? Where do you find your stories other than pitches that you receive?
Right. Yeah. It's a big combination, and it's a lot of through conversations with people, like Michaela said, at events like this, but also just with sources. If I interview someone, I'll say, oh, and who else should I know? Right. And that's kind of how the web builds a little bit. Sometimes it's through people who see a story I wrote about a startup and they say, hey, I actually have a startup and it's completely different, but here's why you also should be covering this. And that's really helpful because, we don't know everything that's out there, as Michaela pointed out earlier. And then also for us as a business journal, a lot of it is through federal filings, SEC filings. Any of the public companies we cover, we go through those, and same for like Form Ds, companies raising money, things like that. But it's kind of a big mix. And then obviously, pitches and press releases as well.
Okay. Amber, do you have anything to add from your journalist days?
Yeah, well, I attended a lot of events, a lot of conference events, a lot of industry briefings and that type of thing. So there would be, like a high profile defense speaker or government speaker. So getting things from what they were saying. And when I've been covering it so long, I could easily notice when the message started to deviate with whatever was said last time or what has been, said previously for a while. But also meeting people at those events. And this has kind of been one of the casualties of COVID, I think, but talking to people and just, hearing about what do they do? What are they working on? What is, really moving and shaking in their world right now? What has had a huge impact on their business or the way that they are working? And just talking to people, just getting out there and doing the best you can to network it. Like I said, it's kind of hard these days, and we do it virtually to the degree that we can. So some of that is social media, but just connecting with people and as someone with a startup, or if you're doing the outreach, having your elevator pitch, like having your elevator speech where it's like your 10 to 20 second, this is what my company does and this is why you should care kind of thing. So that when you do meet someone in an elevator or getting coffee or whatever, you get your point across very quickly and you capture that person's interest with it.
Great. Thank you. Sarah, let me ask you, what is the one thing from the pitches that you receive and the emails that you get, what's that one thing that you wish people just did better? Like, what's our one best piece of advice to give everybody watching here before they send in that first pitch?
That's a good question. I think it's hard to put this into words, but I think the worst pitches I get are the ones where the people clearly just didn't, and you pointed this out, but didn't take the time to figure out what we do. So I don't want to waste your time and ask you all these questions and then find out later this is not a good fit. So when I get a pitch that is just so clearly either as like, very general, very not tailored to our coverage, or just like completely not a business story, it's frustrating because I am taking the time to try to figure out if it's something we would cover, and you put in no work. So I think it's not that you have to spend days preparing a pitch to me. Like, you can just shoot me a very informal email and say, hey, I'm doing this cool thing. Here's why you should write about it. I would love that. But I think it's just knowing what we look for. And those things, I mean, if you have more specific questions for me about this afterward, I'm happy to tell you. Every outlet is a little different, but I think the nuts and bolts are pretty much the same. Is it timely? Is it newsworthy? Is it something we would cover? And can you talk about it? Are you going to be open and sharing, your financials and what brought you here, your journey to this point, and all of those things too?
And you keep bringing that up. And I think that's really important for people watching to note. If you're going to pitch a story to the Business Journal, they want to see your numbers, right? Sarah, will you cover stories without numbers, or that's a really important aspect of your stories?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I wish, it's frustrating, right? Because that, as a business journal, that's one of the things we just have to have in there. If you can't tell me revenue, or for instance, if you're pre-revenue, so there are no numbers, that's okay. But the question is, what is your goal? What is the business model? What are you shooting for in your first year? That type of question is what you're going to get from me in an interview, and you're probably going to be frustrated if you can't answer it. So that's kind of what we look for. It's not that you have to have big numbers that are so impressive. Maybe the number is very tiny and insignificant, but that's because you're brand new and that's what's to be expected. But it's just a matter of being able to address those things one way or another. I asked a company the other day how much they've raised in funding to date, and the answer was none. Like, we've taken no outside investment. And that's great. It's not that you have to meet certain requirements. It's just that we want to understand what makes the business what it is now, and what's going to get it to where it's going, if that makes sense.
It does. And it's really important. You all can save everybody some time. If you're not at a point where you're ready to talk about that, or don't have projections or have anything, don't send Sarah a story. Like, just wait until you're at that point.
Or say, we're super early, but this is our plan. Can I stay in touch? And my answer is, yeah, that would be a dream. So that too is great. Just put yourself on my radar now.
And you actually said that to me the other day. I was mentioning, I talked to somebody and she's way pre startup. But you said, I want to talk to her. Like, I want her on my radar. So that they are looking for these stories, which is great. And I've interviewed a lot of journalists, and I always joke that they have this folder on their desk, but they really do have good story ideas that may not fit in the puzzle right now, or they're not ready for it yet. But then when you do that follow-up, I actually pitched a story and heard back a year later. But a year later, it fit into exactly what they were doing. And they're like, hey, are you still in business? Can we still talk to you about that? So just because you don't hear, or you get a not now, right now, don't think it's the end of the world and you'll never get covered. It just might not fit right now.
And you also never know what we're working on. So for instance, I'm working on something now for later this week. I have a couple of days to work on it. And it's kind of looking at companies that maybe our readers didn't know were based here because they are super early, or in stealth mode, or just, out of beta, and maybe just have never had coverage. And it's just like, no one would know about them unless we wrote this story. Or if we're working on a trend piece about something that's happening in the tech world. And again, maybe you're very early, but you're working to address that thing that we're writing about, then we want to know. So it's always worth reaching out, I would say.
Great. Michaela, do you have anything to add to that, and specifically to what you do?
Yeah. I mean, to that point of timing, I would also add, we actually have an editorial calendar where we focus on a different theme every month. So like, sometimes if it's not super newsworthy, it might be better to wait a month when we're covering a certain topic, and I might be more inclined to say yes. But yeah, I think Sarah covered that aspect really well. But I think something I wish people knew in general was that you don't always have to pitch the story where you're like the main character or even a source in it. I would love it if people would pitch me and say, hey, Michaela, I'm a startup founder and I really am curious about this. Can you do a story on it? I would like to know how X, Y, and Z works. So yeah, you don't have to feel like you can only pitch stuff that you were involved in. Or even maybe you were in an accelerator, and that's cool, but the cooler story is just the accelerator in general. It's brand new. So yeah, just know that you don't always have to be the main point of contact in that scenario.
And I love that you brought that up. I actually had stayed connected with a Fox anchor I had been on, and I found out she loved entrepreneurial stories about women. Well, I'm in the DC women's entrepreneurial space. So I would send her emails all the time. You've got to cover this woman. You've got to cover this woman. And many years later, she had a syndicated show that went across the country about how do you take an idea from napkin to store shelves. And I had constantly been front of mind with her, and she used my story and interviewed me for a television, 30-minute show that aired across the country. So we keep talking about building relationships, but it's super easy to do. And that's one of the best ways. Send Michaela or Sarah a story about somebody that is doing something really great. And then when you're ready, they know who you are and they know you've been valuable to them. Again, back to that win-win-win. How about you, Amber? Anything to add with what they've talked about, and how to source stories, how to pitch well?
Yeah, I think, Michaela made a really good point about the story doesn't have to be about you or your business, but just something that like you're observing in the news cycle. I frequently ask either clients or whoever I'm talking to, what is missing from this conversation? What is happening here that people aren't talking about? What are some of the unintended implications of some recent guidance that came out, or something along those lines, and getting a sense of, from their point of expertise, what do they see as not being discussed enough, not being addressed, or just missing from the conversation as a whole? And that can inform some really great news stories.
I know we only have a few minutes left. If anyone has, we might be able to get to one or two, but Sarah and Michaela, how can people here reach you to send these amazing story ideas that they know now know how to send you? Sarah, how can they reach you?
Yeah, all my contact info is on our website. If you just go to our About Us page or one of my bylines and click it, it's there. I can also just put it in the chat now, but email, phone, Twitter, LinkedIn.
Yeah, Google is an amazing source to finding journalists. And Michaela, how about you?
Yeah, I can drop my email as well. It's just my first name at technical.ly. And somebody pointed out to me that I accidentally sent the public Slack link as a direct message. So I will resend that to everybody.
Okay.
If you would like to pitch me there. But also, yeah, Twitter, LinkedIn, all of the above. Send me a smoke signal. I'll find it.
Awesome. Any questions? I don't see anything in here. We've got 2 minutes left. Anyone want to close up and let's talk quickly about what impact social media has on publicity and PR today? Anyone? Sarah, any comments?
What impact social media has on publicity? I mean, I think it's probably a monster of a topic to get into.
Okay. Maybe that's a panel next time.
It's definitely, look, it's affected how we do everything, right? We're all using it all the time. I think the challenge for me is going through my social media and seeing, what is of interest to me as a reporter versus just as a reader. And in terms of connecting, I think it's a really great tool. So in terms of LinkedIn, connecting, asking people what they're working on and that kind of thing, I use it a lot in that way. Twitter, I struggle a little bit, so I'm probably not the model student in that regard.
That's because Twitter is a black hole.
But that's important that you bring that up, and maybe I'll end on that, is again, building these relationships. Find out where your journalist is online. If they're on Twitter, and a lot of them are, stay with them on Twitter. If they're on LinkedIn, follow them, comment, share. They do pay attention to us. I'm living proof. I promise. I do this every day in my business. Amber can tell you the same thing. It really is a value-driven proposition here to send them good story ideas. And then when the story idea is published and you like their other things, and you build relationships with them.
Yeah, it pays to be super strategic about social media and understanding which content is best for which platform and who's operating on which platform and all of that. So yeah, maybe another panel next year, but be smart and be strategic about it.